Hello, folks. Welcome back to a new week on World War II TV. I've got a little bit of a sore throat and a cough this week, so if I mute myself because I'm having a bit of a coughing fit, but I'm all right. I'm not going to die or anything. I'm just feeling a little bit under the weather. But today's show, we are looking at a very different way of remembering and honouring a fallen soldier at Arnhem. Joining me is my friend Sophie Bainbridge. So, good evening, Sophie. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you? Other than
I'm
the
well,
cold.
apart from the cold, I'm all right. But yeah. So there's multiple threads to this discussion we're going to have tonight because Arnhem's going to come up, Battle of Market Garden, what you do today. But so Stanley Biggs is who we're talking about. So what is Stanley Biggs today in terms of how you use this name as part of your brand, and what is your brand, and what is it you do for those who don't know?
So Stanley Biggs Clothiers is a clothing company, predominantly for gentlemen, and the brand was created really out of inspiration and love for vintage inspired clothing. So items from a bygone era, and predominantly made in the UK from natural materials in very traditional ways. So the brand itself was set up about 4 years ago now, and it's just grown and sort of snowballed in terms of how it's expanded across, sort of introducing different types of garments, accessories. So there's caps, there's jumpers, there's trousers, there's shirts, and each individual item has been designed and inspired by a traditional item. So normally, predominantly, I think a lot of people will look at the items and go, "Oh, that's from the 1930s, or that's from the 1940s." So it does have a certain silhouette, which we've adopted and made our own. And the brand itself is unashamedly inspired by the past because I love my history. So every item is named after a person or a period in history or a location in history. And because of my Midlands roots, so I'm originally from Leicester, or Leicestershire, sorry, I should say. And we're now located on the Notts Derby border. And there's so much history around here. There's country house after country house, stately home after stately home, English Civil War battle after English Civil War battle. There is so much that I can draw myself and inspiration from. So every item sort of champions that.
Right.
So, for instance, our hats, the Chatsworth hats, so Chatsworth House, there's Haddon Cap, there's Haddon Hall, and so on and so forth. And so it's very much through its DNA. And then, of course, the name has its own history and carries its own history as well, which is essentially the history of one particular man called Stanley Biggs, or Stanley Douglas Biggs. And his story, we sort of particularly picked up on, or I've picked up on, when I went over to Arnhem in about 2011.
That's what your website says, 2011. And
Yeah,
this, and you're going to take us back on that journey to 1944 into Arnhem. And this is why I said in the top of the show there's so many overlaps, because I knew your husband, Gary, first since he was like 14 or 15. So there's the reenactment side of things and the reenactment gear that then has the overlap with what you're doing with Stanley Biggs, because some of the same people buy the same kind of gear because they live a kind of a vintage lifestyle. In addition to the World War II aspect, there's this kind of 1930s, 1940s thing, which kind of brings in the whole Peaky Blinders revival thing that's going on these days. And of course, as you say there, the historical research that goes into a clothing line, because as with the reenactment gear that you and Gary provide, the berets and the badges and all that archival work you have to do to make sure colors are right and quality is right. The same thing is regards to the vintage fashion thing. So all this overlap of where history and research kind of kind of, yeah, overlaps is the word there. You know, what is a historian? In so in the sense that someone who is actively looking at how clothing has developed and how it was produced in the 1930s is just as much a historian as someone spending all their time looking at the war diaries of a particular regiment. It's about recreating the past. But now we'll kind of bring up, you've sent us some photos and things like that, which I'll move around when we're talking about. So we're going back to Arnhem, we're going back to the story of Stanley Biggs. So take us back to 2011 when you were there and your journey there and how this whole story began.
Yes, I mean, my background is I read history at university, and in particular, I actually did my dissertation on remembrance, commemoration, and so I've always visited, actively visited. I still do now. If I see a little plaque that says Commonwealth War Grave, doesn't matter how many there are, I will screech to a halt if I'm passing, and then jump out, and many of my friends will attest to this, where we'll be on our way somewhere and I will literally say, sorry, we're just going to go and jump in here and have a look. And Arnhem, 2011 was my first time that I went. It wasn't actually for September, it was actually much earlier in the year. And we'd been to a place called Bussum in the Netherlands, when we took a day trip out to the town of Oosterbeek, which, as you can see on the map there, is essentially on the outskirts of Arnhem. And that is actually where the cemetery is located. I'll be honest with you, at the time, I hadn't really researched or read too much about the Battle of Arnhem. It went a little beyond the film, Bridge Too Far, but I hadn't really, sort of delved that deep into the battle itself. And of course, it is a huge undertaking to even just read about it and understand it and get your head around it and what have you. So I will say now, I'm not going to attempt to explain all the ins and outs of the particular battle. But when I went, I was very fortunate because I was with Gary, who at the time wasn't my husband or even my boyfriend at the time. And he's a huge, an avid reader on the Battle of Arnhem and the airborne forces, and the units and the regiments and the corps that were involved in the Battle of Arnhem. So I was very lucky to essentially have a tour guide of the actual battlefield, which also happens to be a lovely town that is, set up for tourism. It was a heavily orchestrated and designed town for tourism in the 30s, with all the hotels that they had, all surrounding the crossroads, which for the battle obviously became quite significant as well. But so yes, I was very lucky. So I had no ideas. I was just driven there, and I actually requested. I said I'd really like to go to the cemetery, if that's at all possible. Anything else, I don't really mind what anyone wants to do. So we went there, and every cemetery I go to, I'll always look for a namesake, and I have my family names that I've researched. Again, being a bit of a geek, I've got them all, sort of filed and listed and ready to go. And I checked each family name on the basis that I might find one that I can then go and visit, pay my respects to, and just give this huge battle, which was very confusing. It's over a number of days, over a huge area as well. It would just allow me to concentrate and focus on just potentially one person, one unit, and so on and so forth. Now, for me, I was a little taken aback by the fact that every name that I looked for actually had a headstone to visit. So I went away armed with 4 regiments, 4 units to research, and one of them was Stanley Biggs. And each one of those headstones every single one has created and has its own story. So Stanley Biggs is just one of those, and how that's progressed. That each individual one has had that sort of treatment, and it's actually revealed so much to myself about the history, and it's also carried on, in other ways of remembrance as well. But Stanley Biggs was one of the first names, or one of the first men that I was able to successfully research. So there's a wonderful book by Neil Cherry, which is the I'm going to get this wrong now. Red berries and
red crosses, isn't it?
Red crosses, yes.
Yeah, Neil's been on the channel, and he talks about the role of the Royal Army Medical Corps in Arnhem. So I haven't added the link to the show, but to the description, I should do that. So folks, if you haven't seen that show with Neil, this will be a lot of background information to the research Sophie's giving us today.
Definitely, and if you do also have the book on your bookcase, there is an original image of Stanley Biggs. There's an image of the original chit, the glider chit, of Stanley's glider, which is 286, and also a little more detail a little further on in the book of a first-hand account of a chap who happened to be standing next to Stanley Biggs and heard his colourful remark with regards to the situation that they found themselves in. So Neil's information and research was already there, and I've been very fortunate, because all of the other names that I've researched, I've been very minus one. Everything's pretty much been laid out for me. The images actually that you can see, the original wooden cross marker, that was actually sent over very kindly by the Commonwealth War Graves, when I've since recently got in touch with them. So around September last year, I reached out to them and said, look, I'd really want to do something for the Commonwealth War Graves. As a business, I have always wanted to associate myself with a charity, or a good cause, and there's so many, it's so difficult to pick, and I'm sure there'll be others that will be added to in the future. But because of my involvement, because of the information I found simply by walking and visiting Arnhem Oosterbeek War Cemetery, and the story that has sort of unravelled, and as you said, it's interwoven, and it's open door after door after door, and story after story, and journey after journey, and it's resulted in the day when I thought, well, I need to name this company. It was going to happen, and I just could not think of any better name than Stanley Biggs.
It's got a great vintage sounding name to it, and I appreciate the fact that the people who go to the Arnhem Cemetery in Arnhem, or indeed anywhere in the world, sometimes they're going there simply as part of a trip to the region for a kind of an overview of the understanding of what happened. Sometimes they're following a unit and they are looking for the people of that unit who already know the story of the unit. Other people are looking from the names first and going back to find out the unit, because the sharp-eyed amongst you watching have noticed that the wartime graves is Royal Army Medical Corps, and the finished graves says Royal Army Service Corps. So that's an immediate question, is that, obviously, for those who understand that the Royal Army Medical Corps and the Royal Army Service Corps intrinsically connected in terms of the delivery of the units into places like Arnhem by parachute. But that question's come up now. So are they both correct, or is the modern one more correct than the wartime one?
So he was glider-borne troop of 181 Air Landing, our Royal Army Medical Corps. So he was a medical orderly, and which on the obviously you don't have it on the original marker, but the porcelain stone marker, you do have the cap badge of the Royal Army Medical Corps.
Right.
And then, of course, you know, the full number, the full unit is visible there.
I just realized I made a blunder. It wasn't Will I Miss Service because I should wear my glasses when I'm doing this show. I misread the comment there. They are both Royal Medical. I blame my eyesight, folks. They are both clearly the same thing. That's that was me misreading a comment. I'll put that down to my aging eyesight. But I'll hand it back to you then. Sorry, my mistake.
Yeah, no, well, actually, you do say the Royal Army Service Corps. One of the other names that I researched has opened a door to the 250 Company, Royal Army Service Corps, who were active in the supply run and the logistical aspect of the Battle of Arnhem, and off the back of visiting and researching one particular grave. There were several others, but 250 Company, I then also began to research, and there's a very famous account of an ambush after 4 or 5 RASC chaps commandeered a school bus, and there was a very able volunteer, a Dutch volunteer, and there was hundreds of Dutch families that helped and assisted during the battle. And this particular chap was the bus driver, and he decided, it's my bus, I'm going to be driving said bus. Unfortunately, the ambush occurred, and the bus driver was killed, along with another chap who was Lance Corporal Plant, again another family namesake. And if it was off the back of this is years and years later, I was at an event for, it was at Barkston Heath for 250, and then also all of Air Dispatch. And this veteran, Arnhem veteran, whom of course we were very keen to meet, came over, and I began chatting to him. And I explained to him that this is a particular person that I visit the grave of. This was his name, and he, bless him, he almost sort of went white as a sheet, and he said, I was in the ambush, I knew him. So Jack, I sort of remained in touch with, and he actually said on that particular day, the day he met me, he said, I have the war diaries for the unit. I have a lot of paperwork. I've essentially inherited it because each one of us is, sort of slowly passing away. I want you to have it. I want you to be the custodian of it. So I now am the custodian of 250 Company's official documentation as well. You're I mean, rightfully so, the Royal Army Service Corps deserves its own say. And it's its own story as well.
So let's look at the photos. There aren't that many photos of that area in the middle of the battle, because you said it yourself there, it was probably one of the intense hotspots of the perimeter when the remnants of the 1st Airborne Division kind of fall back to the Oosterbeek thumb-shaped perimeter. And that, as you said there, all the hotels and the fancy buildings around there, those open avenues, they were rife for the German armor rolling in, and the engagements there were legendary. But how have you been able to put together the story of Stanley's time there? Obviously, Neil Cherry's book has been a huge help there. But what else have you been able to kind of ascertain about his arrival there and what he was doing, and the events about leading up to his death?
Yes, a combination really of the war diaries, which have then, of course, been published in other publications such as Neil's book. So Stanley landed by glider, I mentioned, which actually the majority of support troops were glider borne as well. I think everyone thinks that everyone's a parachutist, and that's something that we're very keen to sort of quash that myth, I suppose. And but Stanley landed in a glider with several others, with Jeep trailer, 2 panniers, two airborne bicycles as well. And he landed on LZ, or landing zone S. And he was on the first day, so he landed on the 17th of September. Immediately went into battle, as it were, and they set up initially just to the west of Wolfhazer Crossroads. So on the map there, you can see LZS. Wolfhazer is incredibly close, or Wolfhazen, as it is on the map. And that particular picture that you were showing before, that is actually a particular property, number 9, and I'm going to pronounce this wrong now, so I do apologise to my Dutch friends and associates. I think it's Duitseweg, I think. I do apologise. And they essentially, they found a house and they said, right, we're going to use that. And that's where they were for really a couple of hours. I think that the first few hours they admitted 180 men. So you can imagine how busy it must have been. And this particular image is actually a still from film footage. So a cameraman called Gordon Walker, who's attached to the Army Film Photographic Unit, or the AFPU, actually filmed men working in that building and around the building as well, and they captured Stanley in deep conversation with the officer to his left. So Stanley's the one in the jumper, and the irony is not lost on me that I sell a lot of jumpers. And then there's other footage where he's walking in and out with a stretcher with another medical colleague. So there we are. So there he is with his jumper, and it's literally a few seconds long, because the film length is I think it's approximately about 10 seconds before they then have to change the reel. Now, Stanley was actually a member of the surgical unit in 181, so it would have been quite a small team. And as a medical orderly, he wasn't operating as such, but he would have assisted the surgeons, the doctors, and carried out the general care and looked after any soldier that needed any attention post and pre-operation. So essentially what you see Stanley doing there is looking after one of those wounded. So we know that would have been most likely on the 18th of September, purely because it's daytime, and we know that they spent quite a lot of time during the day on the 18th of September before they moved. So they then moved to the Schoonord Hotel, which is on the crossroads in Oosterbeek. So it's now a restaurant, so you can still go. And if you haven't been, do go. It is today it's the centre, as it was then. It's the centre of commemorating.
You're not anybody if you haven't parked up in front of that with a whole line of jeeps and gone inside there with your Denison smocks and the berries on. I've done that, not for a long time. 2004 was my last time doing that, but it's for anybody who ever recreates as a living historian British Airborne, that's kind of a rite of passage, isn't it? Going and having a beer in the Schoonord and parking your jeep outside. Yes, it's, as you said, there, a beautiful place of the world now. And the story about those photos or the clips of that film, moving footage, we should say, you can tell that's kind of early in the battle. It doesn't look quite as desperate as things got, because that's the nature of things in that. And we're not going to unpick the Battle of Arnhem for brevity and because we're just not going to do it. But there's that kind of first couple of days where things generally seem to be going quite well, and the operation doesn't look like it's really slipping up. Yes, it's not been perfect, but there's a sort of a head of steam behind it. Then there's that period of 3 days, 4 days in where it becomes something else, and then the perimeter gets pushed back and back and back, and then ammunition gets short and everything gets short. And we can only imagine for someone like Stanley how desperate it got over the next couple of days as the situation changes. But if you want to kind of summarize for the medical unit just kind of what those next few days were like for them as the perimeter collapses, that would be great.
Yes, so the Schoonord was one of the hotels on the crossroads. There were 3 at the time that were actually on the crossroads. There was another further down called the Tafelberg Hotel as well, and that is now private flats, but it's been restored to, as you can see, the damage was quite severe.
Yeah.
And these particular buildings, because they were perfect for large numbers of wounded, and that is, I think that's really telling of what and the demand and the workload that the medical units were under. You know, as you said early on, they picked number 9. You know, it's just a house. I mean, they are fairly big houses around there, but it is a house, you know, it's a residential. They were then having to find a hotel, then another hotel, then another hotel. And you don't need to be a military historian to realise that picking a huge building on a crossroads that can be easily identified from the air, but also bearing in mind it's the centre of the town, every road leads to there. It's not the most strategically safe or sensible location. And I think just the fact that they really didn't have much choice just sums up, you know, what was happening. What was also happening was they were in Oosterbeek. The bridge, their target, the actual target, was in Arnhem, which is miles away. And it wasn't from being unable to get there because of logistics, or they were taking their time and they didn't think well that, you know, the medical units needed to remain further back or anything like that. It was the fact that they physically could not get through because they were surrounded.
Yeah.
They were having to defend bear in mind as well, Stanley landed on the 17th of September. The battle ended officially on the 26th of September. There was 3 days of drops. So the landing zones, of which there wasn't just one, there was drop zones as well as landing zones. They all needed to be defended. So this perimeter was, you know, 20 odd miles long and wide. And so the 10,000 men that were dropped into Arnhem, at first you think, oh wow, that's a huge force. I mean, it's on par with Normandy. But if you then start to say, okay, well, the airborne forces have dropped in, they don't have any armour for support. They don't have any infantry units to support them. They had very little air cover, etc., etc. It all builds up. And the fact is that then they all have to be spread out over a large area and by foot. You know, they have jeeps, they have push bikes, they have, you know, sort of well bikes and what have you, but they don't have this logistical arm to move them. And 20 miles is, well, I wouldn't want to walk it in a day. I could do, I think most people, but you'd be a bit sore afterwards.
I did it back in the day, and then last time Colin is watching, we were there in 2019. We had aimed to walk from the drop zones right into Arnhem, and we did, to be fair, walk around the actual drop zone for 2 or 3 hours first. We'd already done, you know, probably our required 10,000 steps a day on our apps on our phones. But when we started looking down that road to Arnhem, well, what can I say? We caught a bus. We convinced ourselves the middle bit of the journey was actually just walking for the sake of walking. So we kind of skipped a bit, and we picked it up in near the city. And it's worth pointing out that it's a long way, and also for a lot of people, when they think of the Battle of Arnhem, a huge number of soldiers who fought in the Battle of Arnhem never saw the city, never saw the bridge, never saw any of what we would actually, as you say, they're specifically called Arnhem. They are fighting at Oosterbeek, Wolfhazer, Renkum, all those places, because their unit never got as far as Arnhem. So it's we call it, we define the battle like Arnhem, but and of course Oosterbeek is part of the suburbs of Arnhem. But yeah, as you say, for many of the people never actually saw the bridge at all.
No, and I think it was Johnny Frost's battalion, of which there was around 800 men out of 10,000 got to the bridge. And that's a feat in itself. They were, the plan being, hold it for 2 to 3 days. They held it for far, far longer. The majority of the units were stuck in Oosterbeek. So you can imagine the medical units demand and the chaos that would have ensued, and added on top of that. So for Stanley himself, 181 medical unit, they stayed where they were for up until the 21st of September. They were in the Schoonhold Hotel, which was in the middle of the battle. It crossed hands. Germans took it over. British took it back. Germans took it back. British took it back. There was this constant back and forth, constant chaos, and they couldn't move. They had no choice. Until the 21st, when Marable, who was the CEO of 181, decided that to relieve the pressure a little, they would move a couple of 100 yards down the road to the Tafelberg Hotel. And the Tafelberg essentially became a main dressing station instead of the Schoonhold, because it was just too hot on the crossroads. So the Tafelberg Hotel itself was taken over by 181, and then a lot of Dutch civilians. So there's a lot of personal accounts of young girls living on that street, going to help, the doctors, local doctors helping, particularly in the Tafelberg. And Stanley Biggs, being a medical orderly, would most likely have worked and spoken to the Dutch. If they spoke English, I don't think Stanley would have spoken Dutch. But there's one account when, again, the Tafelberg in German hands, taken over. This is the SS as well. It's the 9th and 10th Panzer units. So they're a crack unit. Yes, they were in respite, but they weren't old men and boys, which of course the intelligence that they had before the operation confirmed that they were definitely old men and boys. The medical orderlies all marched out of the Tafelberg. I believe this was on the 24th of September on this one occasion, and this particular chap, who was stood next to a chap called Stan Biggs. All of them had their hands up above their heads, and they were being, sort of marched out and treated to some special treatment, and they genuinely thought that was it. This is the end of the line. And the account actually mentions that there's a garage next door to the Tafelberg, which was being used as a mortuary. And I think this really sums up Stanley Biggs. He leans over to this chap and says, well, at least they won't have to take us very far. Which, I think, bearing in mind, he landed on the 17th of September. It's now the 24th of September. They'll be exhausted. They'll be filthy. They would have been non-stop and under constant bombardment. I mean, you can see the state of the Tafelberg. And it is also drawing to the end of the battle, where a tactical withdrawal was ordered on the 25th. And it was arranged, as we all know, for the fit and able of the 10,000 to cross the River Rhine in the cover of darkness with the assistance of the Royal Engineers. So another core unit that were key to not only during the battle, but the Canadian Royal Engineers that helped them cross the river. Now, I'm speculating here, but I believe on the 24th, there was a number of injured in the Tafelberg, and I believe Stanley Biggs may have been one of these.
Right.
Purely because there's another account where it mentions that 3 medical orderlies were injured. They're not named, but again, I'm speculating. And which meant he was not fit and able to withdraw. It could also be the case that, like many of them, because there's actually a handful, there's only 10 from 181 that actually crossed the river. So a very, very small number of medical, Royal Army Medical Corps from 181 actually retreated. The majority are either wounded, killed, or stayed behind. And it's a sense of duty as well. Many of them volunteered to stay with the wounded. So there's 2 possibilities that's happened there. And I hope at one point that is revealed to us. And during the planned tactical withdrawal, the night of the 25th, the corps troops, 30 corps that were just over the river in a town called Drill, helped with the cover of darkness, the rainstorm that ensued, just to try and keep the heads down of the Germans. They started a bombardment, an artillery bombardment, and unfortunately, and you're showing the church, Oosterbeek Church, actually the majority of damage caused on Oosterbeek Church was in fact Allied damage. That's also the case with the Tafelberg, and unfortunately a shell hit the Tafelberg and killed a number of wounded, including Stanley Biggs. So Stanley unfortunately was killed by friendly fire in a battle that he'd been part of since the beginning. And the tree, which you can see just to the right of that photograph, is still there today. It has a lot of battle scars on it as well. And he and a number of others were buried initially there until they were eventually moved into the Arnhem Oosterbeek War Cemetery, which is actually located on a drop zone, an original drop zone. Interesting as well, Jan ter Horst, who was the mayor of Oosterbeek at the time, he wasn't actually there during the battle. He'd gone off on business, leaving his wife and children. And everyone knows Kate ter Horst, the Angel of Arnhem. Her house was next door to the church that you showed. It was actually Jan ter Horst who lobbied for the cemetery location. He actually said this is the best location, because he came home after the battle and his garden was a mass grave. So there was several mass graves, and one of them being the Tafelberg. And immediately after the war, immediately after they were buried, the children of Oosterbeek minded and looked after the graves. And the Commonwealth War Grave Cemetery in Arnhem, Oosterbeek Arnhem, was actually eventually finished, as in complete, with Portland headstones, with the Cross of Sacrifice, with the layout that we're all familiar with. It was completed in 52. So it took a long time. And each headstone at the time took around a week to 10 days to carve. Now, bearing in mind the Commonwealth War Graves looks after 1.7 million war dead. I'm not a mathematician, but that's a lot of days. There's a lot of stones to carve.
So my thoughts right now, I'll get them out before I forget them. One is that as part of a Royal Army Medical Corps unit, success and a failure in terms of the operation is something a little bit different if you're on a medical corps, because you can have a successful operation and still, of course, have casualties. There are still people who are going to need your treatment. There are still people who are going to die because they have wounds that cannot be treated by the surgical people. So that they would have expected a bloody campaign because that's their job, even if Market Garden had been a roaring success. So and as we know from the explanation of Lonsdale and the church and the withdrawal across the river, a lot of Royal Army Medical Corps personnel stayed with the wounded and went into the bag. They went into captivity and spent the rest of the war in a POW camp. So that they're going into this campaign with a slightly different understanding of how it might end because of the nature of a Royal Army Medical Corps. The second thought, which you elaborated on, is the fact that tragically, in a battle like this, there are going to be people killed by friendly fire. That not every person killed at Arnhem is killed by a German self-propelled gun coming around the corner, firing a shell that's knocking down a house. They're killed because the nature of this campaign has got to the point where, out of desperation, out of no options left to try and get the survivors out, this barrage came down and he was killed. And also, the thing I want you to expand on is the fact that when we go to a cemetery now, whether it's in Normandy or Arnhem or Belgium or anywhere else around the world, is the headstone we see now, the person who is under that might have been moved just once. He might be buried like Ronville, which is the airborne cemetery. Normally, some of those graves there, they are in the grave they went into before the sun had come up on June the 6th and have never moved once, whereas others have been moved once, twice, because a cemetery became a slightly different temporary cemetery, and then they were collected and rehomed in a permanent cemetery. So how interesting was it for you to go into that process of knowing that he had gone from the Tafelberg, where he was buried near that tree, to the cemetery there, and putting that aspect together? Because you had that time with looking at one, or you said there were several other soldiers you investigated. By doing that work, you could bring one story, one person's final movements, if you like, to make a story from it.
Yeah, I think I mentioned before, I did a lot of study at university on the memorialisation, in particular the Commonwealth War Graves, and the Imperial War Museum as well, and very much from the get-go, the Imperial War Graves Commission, as it was, they knew from when it was founded in 1917, properly began, that they would need to find locations for cemeteries, and that due to the war still continuing, it would be impossible to essentially say to both sides, no, sorry, you can't fight here. This is the cemetery for the dead, that for the battle that you're about to have. So they had, the Commonwealth War Graves were set up purely to mark the dead, and the location of each dead, if possible. And of course, with the First World War, you're talking millions and hundreds and tens of thousands that don't have any known grave. To date, there's, I believe, as of September last year anyway, there's around 100 from Arnhem with no known graves, and they're memorialised in Oosterbeek Memorial. So, and that's the other aspect of the Commonwealth War Graves as well, is that if they don't have a grave, if that initial grave potentially has been lost, the location has been lost, that person is still remembered in a particular way. But yeah, for myself, I was familiar with the fact that many servicemen initially were buried normally together, and that is sort of a harsh reality. It's a very sad reality, but in the time that is afforded the initial burial teams, which aren't Commonwealth War grave led. You know, it's normally men of the unit or a follow-up unit, a support unit that would deal with mass graves. You know, there would be pioneer battalions in particular that would be very familiar with digging with graves, or one day they might be digging latrines. You know, it was unfortunately a daily occurrence. The mass graves around a built-up area, a built-up location in town, would have been very quickly organised, very quickly done. But you do see, you know, sort of individual burials, particularly around the you know, the initial landing zones around Wolfhazer, where clearly, you know, as we've mentioned, it potentially wasn't as chaotic. Yeah. It wasn't as panicked back, you know, where each individual grave could be dug. You know, there was time afforded to them. So unfortunately, you know, the occurrence for Stanley Biggs to have his own individual grave didn't occur, you know, along with the 30 others that he was buried with. But very, I think, and this is, if anyone's trying to research a family member or a person of interest, you know, and I think this is the thing, you know, you don't have to be related to someone to find their story. You know, and please just pick away at whatever bit of history that you're engaged with. Find who they are, and you'll get this information now because the Commonwealth War Graves have published, and it is available on ancestry.co.uk, where you can go on to the war dead. So let's say it's Stanley Biggs and it's the 25th of September 1944, and it will give you a map of the original burial location. And this is, I believe, for every serviceman. So I had, again, a very similar experience, which I don't think would ever occur again, in Normandy. I went several years ago, on holiday. Our holidays consist of battlefield
sites, yeah.
And cemeteries.
I have no idea what you're talking about. That makes no sense to me at all whatsoever. No, I have not. No. There's people watching this have no comprehension at all. He said sarcastically, yeah.
You know, it sounds awful. But we were in Normandy, and Gary, his relation Sophie Bainbridge, was in the commandos, and we were researching that. Our friend Fred, who obviously is no longer with us, he was so lovely, and printed off the exact location, the initial burial location for Cyril. As you know, Gary's very shy. I'm not. We found the location, and it was on the other side of this wall. I thought it was someone's house. That's not a problem. Traipsed all the way up to this huge chalet, and proceeded to knock on the door in a very Johnny Frost manner, of course, and realised, of course, I didn't actually speak French. They didn't speak English, and the only person in the house that could was a young girl. So I thought, well, do I sort of say, actually, our dead relation was buried in your garden. Can we have a look at the area? So we managed to get it around, and you know, they very kindly let us walk around while they had their lunch, which was a bit awkward. But that particular map, that information, allowed us to retrace and realise, you know, where, possibly even when and where Cyril was killed, because there's no evidence of it in any other way, because he's memorialised he's buried in Bayeux, but you know, you're thinking, well, how does that bear? It doesn't bear relation, because again, these large open areas, they were forced sometimes by the dignitaries at the time that said, well, we can't give you here and here and here and here. You've got to have this one large location. And that happened again with myself. We went to Les Sociaux, and not a battle I'm overly familiar with. And we were researching and following the route of the Sherwood Rangers yeomanry. So we stopped there for that. And of course, we visited on the map. You can see, you think, oh, actually, there's 4 cemeteries. So we'll visit all 4 in close proximity, one of them being Jerusalem, which is the smallest Commonwealth War Grave cemetery, and which is still, 140 or so. And we went to Tilly. I did my thing that I normally do, is go to the book, look at my family names, look for a Biggs, no Biggs available. But there was a plant. And I read the very brief description from Ratby, Leicestershire. I thought, well, Ratby, Leicestershire is a very, very small village, and plant is relatively unique in surname. And I had unaware before, I'd stumbled across my great uncle, and he was in the Lincolnshire Regiment, and he was initially buried in the Jerusalem cemetery, but then obviously realised there was no room. But it was my understanding it began as a field burial location. So the barn there was essentially used as a first aid post for the battle. And he was injured and then died 3 days later on the 3rd of July. And that is purely from us going to a cemetery, looking at a name, and then opening that book and researching it. So those initial field burials, you can say, okay, well, he would have been brought here if he was an infantryman. This is where he was, if he died of wounds, it will indicate normally where they were. So, it's invaluable information, and it really, as you said, it pieces together the final.
And it brings it back full circle, this idea of how studying a battle, and that you can go there and study it from an overview point of view of where corps were, where armies were, where divisions were, or in this case, you can start from one person and go backwards to a battle and follow one person's journey there. And when people say, oh, perhaps there's nothing to write about with Battle of Normandy or Market Garden, maybe in terms of understanding the objectives and who was to blame, although I think there is still things to say about that. But what certainly hasn't been done is that everybody who was killed in these battles has not yet been investigated. There's stories behind these people. And we have a question. Some people ask, what do you know about Stanley before going to Arnhem? What about his early life?
Unfortunately, not a huge amount, because, and this is a real shame, but obviously we deem these large momentous World War II occasions or World War One as sort of the main definitive moment of someone's life. And as a researcher, I'm always frustrated by particularly if you're doing Second World War research. If it's awful if they haven't died. Sometimes you have very little information on them. So I'm patiently waiting for the census to be released, and that will obviously indicate a lot more. But he was from London originally. He had no medical background. He was just a labourer, and that's really the only insight that I have. He was married, and his family do survive now. So he had a brother, I believe a sister as well, but he definitely had a brother. So the Biggs name continued, and there's a number of Biggs that are related to Stanley directly that shop with ourselves for that. So and it was actually only after they ordered I thought, any person with Biggs as a surname, I will always reach out
Double
to
check, yeah.
and chat to. So, and of course, you know, my great grandmother was a Biggs. So, you know, if they're not related to Stanley, then there might be in some roundabout way related to me. So, so yeah, so it's a it's one of these things that will continue to expand and grow. And you know, the research it comes from all different locations and areas as well. And I mean, just a few years ago, it was just before the lockdown, a person in a collecting page on Facebook posted up their latest acquisition. They were incredibly proud of it. And we've all been there, you know, we've all got this, you know, the piece that we want to add to our military collection. And this particular chap shared a sleeping bag, an airborne sleeping bag with Arnhem provenance, or with provenance belonging to
someone at Arnhem,
a person at Arnhem, and that person was Stanley Biggs. So his airborne sleeping bag exists. It's in a private collection.
Wow.
Unfortunately, not mine.
No,
I have tried. I have
you
tried.
have tried, but there's always time. But then this brings us to this. You know, we open up with this idea of memorialization and commemoration, and he's in a sense his name certainly lives on. And we should mention the print that Tim Godden, who we both know, Tim Godden, a massive friend of the Suffolk Regiment, Taff Gideon, people I've known for years and years and years, produced this limited edition print that's available via your website of Stanley in front of the Tafelberg in Arnhem, which they can get from your website. And I should point out that links to your website, folks, are in the description below. So, you know, it's a ridiculously crass interviewer's question now. I hate giving it to you, but I'm going to do it anyway. You know, where it's 2023, there's a Stanley Biggs line of clothing. What do you think Stanley Biggs would think about the fact that he now has a brand name named after him? People can go in and come out with a jumper or a hat or a pair of trousers with his name on it.
Well, we have a little insight into Stanley's humour and sense of being surrounded by utter chaos and destruction and what have you, after days and days and days of working tirelessly in probably the worst conditions that you can imagine, and making a joke about being only a few paces away from the mortuary, you know, in the face of the SS, who, you know, the end of the battle have won. I think he would probably have something jovial to say about it. But I think also he'd be incredibly humbled by it, and probably a little embarrassed. But
well, he's British after all. We don't like you know, people saying too much nice things about us. It's just
that's it.
Yeah.
He'd be incredibly self-effacing, and but I think, you know, for him, you know, considering that he was part of such a disastrous operation for so many thousand, you know, there's over 1,300 buried in Oosterbeek, and many of them he would have nursed and been there, you know, on their final moments. I think the fact is that it's his name that is remembered, and his particular story. It also encompasses, you know, all of those others that, as you said, you know, every individual headstone has a story to tell, and it's a shame it's impossible. It's not impossible, but it would take an incredibly long time for one person to tell all of those stories. But you know, the fact is that we can try and highlight that and bring to attention, and hopefully encourage someone else to say, do you know, I'm going to go and have a look at that name just to see what happens. And there's a quote, which is George Eliot. You know, that someone is only forgotten if their name is, and you know, that, you know, they cease to exist once their name is no longer repeated. And I actually heard that quote for the first time in Arnhem as well. So for me, it's really, it's not about glorifying it in a particular way. It is about remembering it. And the fact is that every person who walks past the shop, every person who finds one of the images that we put together of interest, off the back of that, even if they're not interested in making a purchase, it's not all about making sales and selling a jumper or selling a cap or what have you. If they go away going, oh, okay, well, what is the Battle of Arnhem then?
Yeah.
I wonder what that is. Or what happened in September 1944? What does the RAMC do now? If they go away intrigued and curious, that's also an achievement for myself. Yeah. And as a historian, that's including yourself. It's what you do. It's hugely important. And to widen that net with other parts of history, other stories of history. I'm wearing a jumper now that's named after the Battle of Bosworth. So it's about highlighting that and bringing it a bit closer to home and helping someone identify with something that they it triggers an interest there.
No, definitely, and it again, this idea that it's you're overlapping several worlds in that there's the living history aspect, the vintage clothing aspect, the study of battlefields aspect, the business angle, the work you do with Commonwealth War Graves, which we should remind ourselves that your Stanley Biggs line there's got the connection with the Commonwealth War Graves. You are an ambassador for them, and they are happy that you're honouring Stanley in this way, and also this assumption that we may have that all reenactors or people who are interested in vintage history are also interested in the history that surrounds some people who are reenactors. It is all about the gear, and their understanding of the battles and the history behind it is not perfect. Others, they know everything, but there's an assumption that if you're a reenactor, you must understand history. And my experience is that some of them do, some of them don't. It's like anything else. But as you say, there's someone going into your shop there and coming out with a pair of nice trousers in the Stanley Biggs range, who are wearing it because it looks cool, because they're going to an event, they go whatever. They can then go now a sideways tangent and have this access to the Battle of Arnhem via an individual, which is frankly really cool.
Yeah, I think I was I was asked actually. For the first time, someone said, "Oh, so this jumper is named this, and this jumper it's the same pattern, it's just a different color. Why didn't you just call it the navy one or the maroon one?" And I thought, well, why would you do that when you can name it after something that you can then talk about and research and engage with someone else about? Because it doesn't really get you that far, does it, to say, oh, well, I like them. And there will always be an individual that says, I really like that maroon one. That's great. That's fantastic. And on face value, that's the first thing you see. But if you then say, well, this is the Bosworth jumper. Now, the Battle of Bosworth triggered a complete change in British history. That we are still living today. I'm sorry, but how is that not more engaging? That for me, I'm not really that bothered.
Yeah, no,
the worst salesperson in the world.
And choosing a line of clothing by the blue one, the brown one, the grey one, it's just, it doesn't start a conversation, and the conversations are what makes it. And having visited you and Gary's stall at We Have Ways last July, you particularly, Gary, as you say, very shy. You'd happily spend an hour chatting to someone if they happen to buy a pair of braces or something. Great, but you'd be happy telling them about history for an hour anyway, providing you're not letting other customers down who are standing there waiting to speak to you. But it is all about the conversation and the history, which is great. So we'll bring things to end, but I think I should get you and or Gary on at some point and talk about how you go about the research behind vintage clothing, but not just the stuff, the Stanley Biggs stuff, but the reenactment gear, the badges, the insignia, the things like that. I did a little bit of that myself back in the day, but that's a fascinating subject in itself, how you go about recreating something from the past and making it available to sale. So we could do that if you're happy with that at some point.
I'd love to, and that's where Stanley Biggs was born from as well. It's the fact is that we had so many items that we wanted to produce and reproduce accurately, and then there was other items where I thought, well, actually that would look really good this way, or if we changed that, which of course, as authentic nerds in the living history world, we decided that we needed a new brand, which is where Stanley Biggs was born from. So Old Time Design Company led to Stanley Biggs, and but it's something. I mean, you've mentioned We Have Ways. We're actually there. We've been invited by James and Al, who are customers, by the way, which is lovely.
Yeah. So James has one of the hats, I think, doesn't he?
He has one of these jumpers, but he has the Birkin jumper, which is named after Tim Birkin, who was a Nottingham lad, and he's buried in Blakeney. He was one of the Bentley boys. Absolute nutcase by the looks of it. But yeah, so he has one of these, which is based on a Belgium pattern, 1936 Belgium jumper, or French jumper as well. So I'd love to.
Let's share days about that. But in the meantime, I will see you at We Have Ways in September if I don't end up seeing you coming over to Normandy or something like that. In the meantime, but it's been great talking to you. And we reminder folks that the links to the clothing, the Sophie Twitter, TikTok, it's all in the description below. And if you subscribe to the website, you can get the newsletter and updates about the clothing lines, and also, as we found out, history lessons as well. It's not just about buying the trousers; it's getting the history that goes with the trousers, which is really cool. So, Sophie, it's been great talking to you. And folks, thank you very much for watching. Nothing tomorrow, then Wednesday, we have another show coming at you, similar topic in that we're talking about Their Finest Hour, which is a project Oxford University is running to bring together collections of stories and objects from World War II. So that'll be really cool. Then we got lots of stuff. We're going off to Greece with New Zealand machine gunners on Thursday. And as always, check the descriptions for all the show times. So thank you very much, Sophie. Thanks, everybody, for watching. I will see you all next time. Cheers, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Good night.